Chapter 8. Jess sighed as she stared at the empty room. Emily was out, probably with Jared and the rest of her group again. She had told Jess about the others over the last few days, and while she'd invited Jess along, Jess wasn't sure she was ready to be immersed in Emily's crowd yet. On top of that, Jess had been avoiding Chad all week, and he hadn't called either. Her old habit would have been to go out to a club, pick up a handsome man, and bring him back home. But every time she dressed for that occasion, her stomach would clench up, and Emily's words would parade back through her head. Was God trying to get her attention? From across the room, the black book called out like a beacon in a storm. Would it shock her again? Running her palms down denim-clad thighs, she pushed herself up from the bed and crossed to Emily's nightstand. Jess's hand hovered over the book, but no heat licked at it this time. Had she imagined it last time? Tentatively, she dropped a finger to the cover. Nothing. Gathering the last of her courage, she placed her palm flat on the cover and closed her eyes. A spark of light and the image of a cross filled her vision. Startled, Jess pulled her hand back and stared at the book. There was no pain, but why was she seeing visions? She had never seen visions before. Were they permanent? She held her breath and touched the book again. Nothing. No light, no cross, just the textured cover. Jess sat on Emily's bed, pulled her knees to her chest, and opened the book, deciding to look towards the end this time. The red text jumped out at her. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. She turned back a few pages. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Eternal life? Was this for real? Jess raised her brows but kept reading. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. Was she condemned? More importantly, if she was, could she change her fate? A desire to learn all she could filled her soul, and Jess eagerly turned back to the book. The sound of the door opening interrupted Jess's reading, and she slammed the book shut and replaced it on Emily's nightstand. As she pushed herself up from the bed, she smoothed the comforter. Only a few wrinkles hinted at her intrusion on Emily's side, but Emily looked too preoccupied to notice. Whoa, what happened to you? The normal smile that framed her heart-shaped face was missing, and her flawless olive skin appeared paler than usual. Emily shuddered. I just feel dirty. Some guy came up to me as we were leaving the restaurant, and he practically undressed me with his eyes. I think I need a dozen showers. She shivered and rubbed her arms as she sat on the bed. Welcome to my world, Jess muttered. What do you mean? Emily looked up, and her eyes were so sincere that a chunk of the wall Jess had built around her heart crumbled, and she found herself telling Emily about her stepfather. Oh my gosh, Jess. I'm so sorry. Emily rose from her bed. She crossed the room and sat beside Jess. Jess shrugged. I'm kind of used to it. He wasn't the first, just the worst. The first time my mom fell to drugs, she hooked up with a real winner. He had a temper, so I never knew whether he was going to hit me or... She stared down at her hands, embarrassed, and let the sentence trail off. That is not okay. It should never have happened to you. Is that why you're so... guarded? Maybe, Jess said, tracing a line on her left palm with the thumb of her right hand. You're less likely to get hurt if you keep walls up, you know? Emily's brown eyes stared into Jess's with a blazing intensity. I know you aren't a believer, but can I pray for you? It was the second time Emily had asked her, and while Jess still wasn't sure she believed in prayer, Emily seemed to, and her voice held a sense of urgency. What could it hurt? Jess nodded, and Emily bowed her head and closed her eyes. Lord, my friend Jess is hurting because of her past. Please heal her and show her your love. As Emily continued praying, Jess felt another chunk of the wall she had so carefully created crumble. Tears welled up inside and threatened to overflow. She sniffed and ran a hand over her eyes, willing them to stay dry. The effort was futile. They spilled out, creating wet, shiny tracks down her cheeks. Her shoulders heaved as 6 years of hurt slammed against the dam, crumbling it to bits. When Emily finished praying, she grabbed Jess's hand. "Can he take it away?" Jess sobbed. "Can he make me forget my past?" "Your past is always with you," Emily said. "But he can give you a brighter future. You don't have to be a slave to your past." Suddenly, Jess wanted that more than anything. She didn't know if Emily was telling the truth, but if there was even a possibility, she wanted it. "Tell me what to do. I want the peace you seem to have." "Just ask God to save you. Tell him you know you're a sinner and you want him to guide your life." Jess said the words through tears, and when she finished, Emily hugged her. Though she was not generally a huggy person, she found her arms returning the embrace as a weird need to laugh bubbled inside. A tiny chuckle escaped along with the words. "What do I do now?" "Now you read. You learn everything you can, and you try to live it. I won't lie, it isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." "What about the emptiness? I still feel it." "You have to give that to God. It won't go away instantaneously, but he will begin to fill it if you let him." Jess nodded, smiling at Emily and enjoying the lighter feeling. Though the emptiness remained, it felt like a heavy blanket had been lifted from her shoulders. "Hey, will you come to church with me Sunday?" Emily asked. "There's a really great college crowd at my church." Jess nodded, almost mechanically, but her mind wondered if she would be accepted with her shaved hair and nose ring. Chad's throat grew drier the closer he got to Amarillo. He had been home a few times in the summer, but as his dorm allowed him to stay on campus during the summer, he had claimed his summer work of clerking at a counselor's office kept him stuck in Lubbock, and had avoided spending much time at home. Though he was coming into town to see Amy, he knew he would have to make at least a quick stop at his parents' house, but he decided to do it on the way out of town. He was surprised to see a moving van in front of Amy's house when he pulled up. Intrigued, he locked the car and walked up the steps. Before his hand even hit the doorbell, the door swung open. "Oh, hello, Chad," Amy's mother said from the other side. While he hadn't spent much time here, Amy's parents had often joined them for dinner and festivities when Kyle was living. The last 2 years had added a few streaks of gray to her chestnut hair and a few new wrinkles around her green eyes, but otherwise she looked exactly the same. "Hello, Mrs. Bledsoe. Is Amy here?" "Of course, dear. She's in her room, finishing packing. It's the second door on the left down that hallway." She pointed behind her to the hallway, now devoid of family photos and knickknacks. "Thank you." Chad stepped over the threshold into the nearly empty living room. Blank bookshelves and a couch were all that remained. He wondered where they were moving to, and if the move had anything to do with Amy's cryptic call. The second door on the left was only partially closed, but Chad still knocked before pushing it the rest of the way open. Amy's head popped out of the closet at the slight squeak of the hinges. "Oh, good. You came. Give me a second," she said, and a moment later she reemerged, a stack of clothes slung over one arm. She laid them on the bed and looked up at him. "I guess you can tell we're moving, huh?" "Yeah. Where to?" Chad asked. He didn't really care, but it seemed impolite not to ask. "California? My dad got a job out there, so off we go. Not the way I wanted to spend my senior year, but I guess those are the breaks sometimes, right?" A sad smile crossed her face for an instant before she wiped it away. At least she would have a senior year, Chad thought. Kyle never got that chance. "Yeah, life isn't always fair," he said aloud. She caught the tone in his voice and opened her mouth as if she were going to say something, then thought better of it. Instead, she crossed to the roll-top desk, which was devoid of anything except a notebook. Picking it up, she turned back to him and held it out. "What's this?" he asked, taking the spiral notebook from her. It was Kyle's. Our English teacher made us keep a journal. At first, Kyle hated it, but then he got into writing out his feelings and he wrote in it all the time. I guess he left it here one day when we were studying. I found it under my bed. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ears and dropped her eyes to the floor. "You need to read it because he wrote about you." Her eyes lifted to Chad's, and in them burned an intensity. "He really looked up to you," she said. "You meant the world to him." Chad returned her gaze for a moment before opening the notebook. The first few pages held short, choppy paragraphs, and after scanning them, Chad could see this was when Kyle was writing just to fulfill the assignment. But as he turned the pages, the paragraphs grew longer and more detailed. Near the end, the entries were full pages, sometimes more. The last entry in the book was dated only a few days before Kyle's death. I'm worried about my brother Chad. He used to be so strong in the faith, but college has changed him. He no longer talks about God much, and I haven't seen him pray in ages. Now all he talks about is girls, and I'm afraid he is caving into the pressures of the world. I hope God sends an angel to protect him. Chad looked up from the page. Kyle had hoped God would send an angel for him? He should have been praying for Kyle's protection. But as he thought back to his freshman year, he realized Kyle had been right. Chad had started slipping away from God even then. Not like he had after Kyle's death, but with little things. Not reading his Bible daily, forgetting to pray, rationalizing physicality in relationships. Can I keep this? He asked Amy. He wanted to read it more in depth, and it was a link to Kyle, a side of him he hadn't seen. Amy nodded. I can't think of anyone Kyle would want to have it more. Thank you, Chad said, clutching the notebook in his hands. He turned to leave, but then paused and faced Amy again. Kyle cared for you too. I hope you know that. Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. Before her tears could fall and encourage his own, Chad exited her room and the Bledsoe house. He placed the notebook on the passenger seat beside him before backing the car up and heading towards his parents' house.